After dismissing his court, King Olawale summoned one of his skilled assassins, Alakija the warrior. When the man arrived, he bowed deeply before his monarch. "You called for me. Your Majesty," his voice was soft but carried an undercurrent of lethal efficiency. Olawale fixed him with an intense stare. "I have a mission of grave importance and utmost discretion for you, one that could prevent an inevitable war with Iwoland if bungled even slightly." The assassin's eyes narrowed, but he gave a sharp nod, awaiting his orders. "There is a seer from Akinwande's kingdom who claims to have received visions revealing the whereabouts of my daughter, Princess Adaku. I need you to infiltrate Iwoland and capture this seer unharmed so he can share the full details of his vision." The warrior's eyes widened slightly at the audacious task, but he remained composed. "I understand the need for stealth. To be discovered would surely ignite the powder keg with akinwande." "Precisely," Olawale said grimly. "That is why you must avoid detection at all costs. If even a single Iwoland citizen or patrol spots you, it could trigger the war one desperately trying to prevent over this." He fixed him with a hard look. "I don't need to remind you of the catastrophic consequences should you fail on this mission. Thousands of lives hang in the balance." The assassin gave a solemn nod. "You have my word, Your Highness. I shall move like a ghost to secure the seer. Not a whisper of my incursion into Iwoland's borders will be detected." Olawale studied him a moment longer before giving a curt nod of approval. "See that you don't. I'm entrusting you with the fate of this entire kingdom and my beloved daughter's safety. Do not return until the seer is neutralized and ready for interrogation." With a swirl of his cloak, he turned on his heel and strode from the throne room, his footfalls utterly silent. Olawale watched him go, feeling the weary burdens of 1,000 contingencies weighing on his shoulders. He could only pray this desperate gambit would not provoke Akinwande's feverish retaliations before he could locate Adaku first. For if it did, not even the strongest protective wards would be enough to shield his family from the ancestral bloodletting to come. Deep within the dense jungles bordering Iwoland, King Akinwande's search parties trekked relentlessly, hacking through overgrown foliage and fording treacherous rivers. At the lead was Jagun, the legendary obsidian Blademaster, whose merciless skills were as infamous as his cavalier disregard for mortal life. As the humid day wore on, even Jagun's hardened warriors began showing signs of fatigue. Rivulets of sweat streamed down their dirt-caked faces, and their muscles burned from forcing their way through the seemingly endless tangle of prehistoric vegetation. Jagun, one of the men, called out gruffly, "We should make camp soon," pressing on much farther risks, leaving us too drained to handle any surprises that may be lying in wait. The Blademaster didn't even break stride as he effortlessly cleaved a thick curtain of vines barring their path. "Surprises will be the least of your concerns if we fail His Majesty's sacred mission," he said flatly. "Our king's oath weighs heavier than any physical toll." The warriors exchanged worried glances but knew better than to protest further. Akinwande's elite assassins lived and died by a profane warrior's code that transcended mortal constraint. Eventually, they reached a relatively clear area beside a babbling jungle stream. As the men gratefully dropped their packs and weapons, gulping down greedy draughts of water, Jagun silently scanned their surroundings with flinty eyes. "We'll rest here for a few hours to replenish our strength," he announced at last in a tone that brooked no argument. "But I want full vigilance maintained. We're deep in uncharted, hostile territory now on the trail of our elusive quarry." Nodding at two of his fiercest trackers, his expression was as immovable as the obsidian blades sheathed across his back. "Bakar Okosi, take first sentry shift. Kill anything on two legs that moves within 100 yards of this camp without my express approval." The two men stiffened, but gave curt nods of acknowledgement. Jagun's reputation for casual brutality was known to all. As the warriors began settling in, heating rations over small fires, Bakar leaned close to his compatriot Okosi. "Did you notice Jagun's agitation increasing the farther we tracked into these unknown realms?" he muttered under his breath. "I've never seen the bogeyman so unnerved before." Okosi shot a furtive glance towards their Blademaster commander, who sat apart from the group sharpening his weapons with long, practiced strokes of the whetstone. "Can you blame him?" Okosi replied quietly. "We're wandering blind trying to locate Prince Azubuike and that deceitful princess based on nothing but vapor trails and old rumors at this point." His gaze hardened. "You know as well as I that if we return empty-handed from this fool's quest, Jagun's own blade may be the instrument of our unholy retributions." The two fell into an uneasy silence, keenly aware of how much now rested on their blades and tracking skills to date Akinwande's increasingly unhinged obsession. Yet even as they kept vigilant watch over the encampment's perimeter, Jagun's piercing stare seemed to burn straight through the jungle itself. The scent of his long-awaited quarry's trail was finally growing stronger, whipping his battle lust into a frenzied tempest. Queen Funmalayo led her elite band of Oyolander warriors through the treacherous jungle terrain, pushing past every obstacle in their path with grim determination. Sweat poured down their faces as they hacked through the dense undergrowth, the humid air feeling like a weightless shroud. "Stay alert," the queen called back over her shoulder. "These forests are rife with all manner of deadly surprises if we let our guard down for even a moment." Funmalayo's second in command, a grizzled veteran named Mokowo, grunted in acknowledgement. "The men are ready for any threat, my queen. But we've been pushing hard for many leagues now without rest. Perhaps we should make camp soon before fatigue becomes our biggest danger." The queen's eyes narrowed, but she gave a curt nod after considering his counsel. Up ahead, she spotted a small clearing beside a freshwater stream that would make an ideal temporary campsite. "There," she pointed. "We'll shelter ourselves there for a few hours to recover our strength. But I want double perimeter watches posted and rotated frequently. No lapses." As they entered the sun-dappled clearing, the warriors gratefully dropped their packs and equipment with deep exhales. Many immediately gathered up water pouches and canteens to refill from the gurgling stream. Mokowo approached Funmalayo, who was studying a makeshift map sketched on tanned hide. "We're making good progress, Your Majesty. But these forests extend for leagues in every direction with no clear paths." The queen's jaw tightened. "I realize that. But giving up or slowing down is not an option, my warriors understand." She fixed him with an intense look. "Not when my beloved daughter's life and freedom could hang in the balance with that vile snake Akinwande's butchers also hunting her." Mokowo gave a solemn nod, recognizing the anguish beneath her determination. They all knew the stakes far too well. If Iwoland's forces reached the missing princess before they did. A shudder passed through the grizzled warrior at the terrifying possibilities. He was proud to follow a ruler whose ferocious love for her family matched her battlefield valor. "We will press on relentlessly until our last breaths if needed, Your Majesty," he stated firmly. "Princess Adaku will want for nothing, while even a single Oyolander warrior still draws breath." Funmalayo's expression softened slightly at her captain's pledge. Giving his arm an appreciative squeeze, she turned her focus back to the wilderness, stretching endlessly in every direction. The night was still and peaceful in the humble village of Agada. Alakija and Abidemi lay contentedly in each other's arms, lost in blissful slumber after another hard day's labor in the fields. But then, Alakija suddenly jolted awake with a startled gasp, eyes wide and staring sightlessly. Abidemi roused groggily beside him. "Alakija," she mumbled, blinking in the darkness. "What's wrong, my love?" When he didn't respond right away, she felt a tendril of dread grip her heart. Pushing herself upright, she gently grasped his shoulder. "You're trembling. Did you have a nightmare?" Alakija finally turned to face her, and Abidemi was alarmed to see his expression a rictus of shock and barely contained rage. Sweat glistened on his brow as he struggled to find his voice. "A dream." No, it was more than that, he rasped in a hoarse whisper. It felt so viscerally real, like a vision tearing through the fabric of our peaceful world here. He ran a shaky hand across his face, replaying the horrific imagery searing his mind's eye. "In the dream I saw my father." Abidemi felt the blood drain from her face at those ominous words. "Akinwande?" Here her grip on his arm tightened instinctively. Alakija gave a slow, grim nod. He came riding hard towards Agada at the head of what looked like a battalion of his elite enforcers and mystic wardens. I watched helplessly as their vanguard stormed through the village gates, faces twisted into snarls of bloodlust. His voice grew even lower, almost a pained rasp. And then the vision shifted. Suddenly I was standing in our garden, staring into the merciless eyes of my father himself. Abidemi felt icy tendrils of dread grip her soul. Alakija, what did he do? What happened next? For a long moment, her beloved simply stared at her with an expression of abject horror she had never witnessed before. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with unspeakable grief. He looked right through me with nary a flicker of paternal recognition. No warmth, no love. Only an endless chasm of hatred and the stalking need for profane retribution. Alakija pulled Abidemi into a fierce embrace, clutching her tightly as he relived those final, nightmarish moments. Akinwande raised his hand, and without a single word, his mystic enforcers turned towards our home. And that's when the visions took an even darker, more depraved turn. He trailed off, unable to give voice to whatever unholy acts had played out next in the depths of his subconscious mind. But Abidemi didn't need any more details to imagine the ancient savageries her lover's father was capable of inflicting upon them. For a long while, the couple simply clung to each other in silence, the profound serenity of Agada's pastoral landscapes shattered by Alakija's visions of ancestral darkness breaching their sanctuary. Finally, Abidemi found her voice in a tremulous whisper. "My brave Alakija, was it merely a nightmare plaguing your slumber? Or she swallowed hard? Or was it something more? A true glimpse beyond this mortal veil we've constructed around our lives?" Alakija looked deep into the eyes of his eternal soulmate and gave a mournful shake of his head. "I cannot say for certain, my luminous angel. But in my heart, I fear this dream's visions carried the unmistakable weight of an omen, one that portends our hard-won peace shattering into chaos and darkness the likes of which we've never known." Drawing Abidemi closer still, he rested his cheek atop her head and stared out into the shadows cloaking their village with a mixture of dread and solemn acceptance. "My father's profane tempest draws nearer with every passing moment, my love. I only pray the shelter of our love and truth can withstand the utter devastation he means to unleash upon us." King Akinwande paced the throne room of Iwoland's royal palace, his expression a mask of grim determination. The seer Abasi's startling visions had finally provided the clue he'd been desperately seeking, a glimpse into the location where his disgraced son and that vile Oyolander serpent festered in betrayal. But blazing through the jungle wilds blindly would only invite further delays and frustrations. No, he needed to adapt a more calculated strategy to ensure swiftly locating and dealing with this transgression permanently. Turning to the captain of his personal guardsmen, Akinwande fixed the man with an intense stare. "Summon the seer Abasi to my chambers at once. I have need of his attention. I need him to draw me a map to the place he saw in his vision, so as to make my journey more easier. I need him to specialized insights for the journey ahead." The guardsman gave a curt nod before turning on his heel and marching from the hall. He knew better than to question any direct order from his volcanic sovereign. As he awaited Abasi's arrival, Akinwande moved over to an ornate weapons cabinet and slowly opened the reinforced doors. His piercing gaze roved over the masterfully crafted swords, daggers, and other armaments before settling on an ancient obsidian-bladed longsword. With a reverent hand, he removed the blade from its rack, marveling at the wicked curve of its smoky metal. This was no mere decorative relic, it was soul render, the ancestral king's blade passed down through Iwoland's royal lineage for over 1,000 years. Akinwande's jaw tightened as he slowly turned the lethal heirloom over in his calloused grip. He could still feel the echoes of 100 conquered foes' dying gasps resonating through the mystical alloy, fueling its subtle thrum of bloodlust. This blade would not only serve him well in the battle undoubtedly to come, but its very presence would remind the misguided prince and his vile consort of all they had forsaken and defiled. The throne room of Oyoland's royal palace was thick with tension as King Olawale eyed the cowering figure kneeling before him. It was Abasi, the mystic seer from Iwoland, whose visions had revealed the location of the missing Prince Azubuike and Princess Adaku. Olawale's most skilled assassin, Ikun, stood beside the captured seer. The warrior inclined his head respectfully to his monarch. "I secured the target undetected just as you commanded, Your Majesty. Not a single soul in Iwoland was any the wiser to this audacious extraction." A thin smile played across Olawale's lips as he appraised the quivering seer with undisguised disdain. "Well, well, what an unlikely guest we have in our company this evening," the king said in a deceptively light tone that carried hints of menace. "But before we extend any warmth of hospitality..." He fixed the warrior with a piercing stare. "You're certain your infiltration went entirely unnoticed? No patrolling guards? No witnesses that could inevitably leak word back to that paranoid warhound Akinwande?" The warrior shook his head firmly. "Your faith was not misplaced, my liege. I moved like smoke on the night winds to spirit this one from Iwoland's borders. He was alone and vulnerable when I struck, none are the wiser to his abduction as of yet." Excellent. Olawale's smile became slightly more predatory as he turned his full attention to the terrified abasi. "Then let me illuminate how the rest of this evening's proceedings will unfold, mystic. I'm going to ask you one very simple question regarding the visions you allegedly received about my daughter's whereabouts." Taking a few measured steps toward the seer, Olawale's expression turned to cold granite. "And if your answer carries even a whisper of falsehood or deception, I will ensure your torturous, dying corporeal screams provide a new soundtrack for Oyoland's dungeon depths from now until your wretched demise." Abasi's eyes went wide with terror at the king's gruesome promise. Frantically, he bobbed his head in frantic acknowledgement, even as his body shook with fear. "Please, great Olawale," he stammered desperately. "I swear on every ancestor's grave I shall speak nothing but complete truth. The visions were clear, I would never..." Silence. Olawale's bark caused the old man to flinch violently. "I did not give you leave to babble your insignificant placations." Leaning down until his face was mere inches from Abasi's, the Oyolander king fixed him with a glare that could wither even the most steadfast soul. "Here is your one allowance to buy a few more agonizing breaths of life," he said in a tone of frozen finality. "Tell me plainly, did your visions reveal the precise location where my beloved adaku resides alongside Prince Azubuike as we speak?" Abasi swallowed hard, feeling the king's iron will like a vise crushing his windpipe. But the seer knew any prevarication would only unleash this merciless ruler's unspeakable wraths upon him. "Yes, great Olawale," he rasped out, desperation cracking his voice. "The gods granted me visions of a remote village deep in uncharted territories where the prince and princess are said to dwell together outside your noble kingdom's influences." Olawale studied him carefully a moment longer, then straightened with a curt nod of satisfaction. "A good start towards extending your pathetic existence a while longer," he stated flatly. "Now, you will provide the utmost detailed accounting of this village's location down to the most minute landmark or geographical feature." His eyes bored into Abasi's skull with the intensity of a battlefield tactician mapping out a kingdom's invasion. "Leave nothing out, not even a single rock or knoll you witnessed. For if your directions prove insufficient in any way, and my warriors fail to locate adaku swiftly..." The king's smile turned absolutely lupine as his fingers toyed with the ornate dagger sheathed at his belt. "I shall take immense satisfaction in reintroducing you to every grisly torture this ancient kingdom was birthed from until your worthless bones finally relinquish their hold on this world." The warrior stood silently to the side, his expression an implacable mask as the seer began spilling every blessed detail from his nightmarish visions under Olawale's threats. The assassin knew in that moment that his blade would taste noble blood before this escalating conflict reached its conclusion, regardless of whoever was deemed unworthy of walking beneath the ancestral sun afterwards. Abasi trembled violently as King Olawale's piercing gaze bore into him like a hawk studying its prey. The seer knew this moment would decide whether he lived to see another sunrise or met an untimely demise at the Oyolander monarch's infamous cruelty. "Enough of these trivial delays," Olawale growled, his voice laced with impatience. "Tell me everything, and I want every minuscule detail you relayed to that bitter soul Akinwande about the whereabouts of his cursed son and my beloved daughter." The seer swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly drier than the desert wastes. But he knew better than to defy or test Olawale's wrath further. Great king, the first speak only truth from what the gods revealed to me. Abasi began in a reedy rasp. In my vision, Prince Azubuike and Princess Adaku were beheld living humbly together in a remote village far beyond your kingdom's territories. He paused, studying Olawale's expression anxiously before continuing in a rush. They seemed to have forgone all titles and regal trappings, toiling as mere peasant laborers. The two appeared, united in some higher cosmic truth, stripped of hatred and prejudice from their former existences. Olawale's eyes narrowed dangerously at this, but he gave a curt nod for the seer to elaborate on the location. The village rests in a fertile river valley, heavily forested but with vast farmlands surrounding its thatched huts. Abasi said, trying to recall every visual detail seared into his mind's eye. Towering mountain peaks dominate the horizons in all directions, unnaturally shaped and sized, as if sculpted by the ancestors' own hands eons ago. As he spoke, the seer sensed the king closely cataloging every geographic clue and landmark. Finishing with a relieved exhale, Abasi dared to meet Olawale's flinty stare once more. That is the extent of what my vision revealed. Great Olawale, he said carefully. I beg you believe I have held nothing back vital to locating your daughter and the prince's whereabouts. A tense silence stretched for several beats. Then, almost imperceptibly, Olawale gave the slightest of nods. For your sake, wretch, I pray your claims of transparency are indeed truthful, he said in a tone as hard as chiseled granite. Now get out of my sight before I reconsider adding your head to my collection of vanquished nuisances. Abasi needed no further encouragement. Scrambling clumsily to his feet, the terrified seer backed away rapidly towards the exit, eyes never leaving the imposing figure of the Oyalander king. But just as he reached the chamber's threshold, Olawale's voice stopped him with a few final chilling words. One last advisement, mystic filth, if I discover even a whisper that you've divulged anything about our little reunion to a single soul outside this palace. The king slowly drew his ornate dagger, holding its razor edge up to catch the torchlight in a menacing gleam. I will make you watch as I flay the flesh from your dearest loved ones before finally allowing the blessed mercy of separating your decrepit skull from its shoulders. The implication was clear. Olawale would show no quarter in exacting vengeance upon Abasi's family should he prove foolish enough to break his silence about this encounter. With a frightened squeak, the hapless seer practically sprinted from the throne room, the echoes of the king's murderous vow ringing in his ears. He would take great pains to vanish into the ether until this storm of warring kings finally blew over. For now, his death had been postponed by a hair's breadth. But if akinwande ever discovered his ignoble abduction, Abasi knew no force on earth could save him from the apocalyptic reprisals to come. In Agada, the morning sun peeked over the lush valley of Agada, its golden rays filtering through the thatched roof of Alakija and Abidemi's humble hut. But the couple had already been awake for hours, too shaken by Alakija's harrowing dream to find any further restful slumber. They sat outside on a small woven mat, faces etched with worry and concern, as they rehashed every disturbing detail of the nightmarish visions. Alakija's hands fidgeted anxiously while Abidemi leaned in close, her delicate features creased in a worried frown. We cannot simply dismiss this as some mere spectre haunting your subconscious, my love, she said softly, running a soothing hand along his arm. These visions you described feel different, more substantial, like a dark portent seeping through from realms beyond our understanding. Alakija gave a weary nod, his eyes downcast. You're right, my radiant Abidemi. As much as I wish I could rationalize it all away as manifestations of suppressed fears, my soul screams that these nightmares carry the unmistakable weight of grim omens soon to pass. He looked up at her then, lines of anxiety etched into his brow. Which is why I believe we can no longer keep our former lives shrouded in secrecy, no matter how deeply we've managed to bury those ashes here. Abidemi felt her heart clench at the implication behind his words. For so long, she and Alakija had nurtured their bond far from the prejudices and conflicts that once sought to smother their eternal truth. Now that reality may come crashing back in like a furious tempest to unmake everything. You don't mean? She left the question unfinished, almost too fearful to give voice to the notion. Alakija simply nodded grimly. We may have little choice but to reveal our full former identities, my ties to akinwande and the iwoland throne, and yours to Oyoland's royal lineage. His expression softened as he reached out to cup her face tenderly. It's the only way to secure wise counsel from elders in how to counter whatever profane machinations my father has no doubt set into motion against us. To face this storm safely, my love, we cannot move blindly any longer. For a long moment, Abidemi simply gazed at her eternal soulmate, feeling a profound sense of sadness and trepidation well up inside her. She knew Alakija spoke wisdom born of painful necessity, but it did not make the thought of exposing their former lives any less daunting. Finally, she gave a slow nod of acceptance. You're right. We must shed our humble civilian guises completely if we are to stand any chance of weathering the coming storms unbroken. Her eyes shone with determination. But who in the village can we navigate this burden to? Whose spiritual guidance and protection can we trust implicitly? Alakija didn't hesitate. There is only one person here whose compassion and integrity I would stake our family's survival upon, he said firmly. Baba Oruko has been a benevolent mentor and friend since the day we arrived as lost, destitute strangers in Agada. If any soul can illuminate the righteous path forward for us, it will be him. Abidemi considered his words carefully, then nodded in agreement. The kindly old fisherman's wisdom and moral fortitude were beyond reproach. He would not turn them away, even after learning of their clandestine royal lineages. Very well, she said. Then you should seek an audience with Baba Oruko immediately before these omens take an even darker turn. Every moment now carries grave implications for our family's safety. Alakija stood as well, his movements laced with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Pulling Abidemi into a fierce embrace, he leaned his forehead against hers and stared deeply into her eyes. Have courage, my eternal star, he murmured softly. No matter what profane tides seek to drown our unity, we shall withstand them together unflinching and unbroken. For our love's truth outshines even the most abyssal of ancestral dark sides. Stealing one last tender kiss, Alakija prepared himself to confide their full former realities to Baba Oruko. Though they knew not what karmic whirlwinds would be unleashed by this revelation, their symbiotic souls were now steeled to endure any storm winds as a single, indomitable life force. In Iwoland, the morning sun cast long shadows through the dusty streets of Iwoland's capital city as the warrior made his way towards Abasi's humble dwellings. King Akinwande had issued explicit orders the seer was to be retrieved immediately to provide detailed maps and navigation for the king's personal retribution march against his disgraced son. As the warrior approached Abasi's thatched hut, he expected to find the elderly mystic most likely still rousing himself after a night of spiritual meditations. But a quick check inside revealed the ramshackle residence eerily vacant and undisturbed. Frowning, the warrior ventured further into the small compound, scanning the cluttered yards and outbuildings for any sign of the seer or his family members. But there was no one, almost as if the entire sect had simply vanished into thin air. The burly enforcer felt a flicker of unease prickle his battle-hardened nerves. Abandoning one's domicile unannounced in Iwoland often carried unpleasant implications regarding the king's dissatisfaction. Just as he turned to depart and report this concerning development, a solitary figure emerged from a narrow path leading into the scrublands ringing the village. It was Abasi himself, bent nearly double as he slowly tottered towards his home with the aid of a gnarled walking staff. "You," the warrior barked out gruffly, startling the old man. "There you are, wretch. I've been searching high and low for your worthless carcass." Abasi jerked upright, pale eyes widening at being so brazenly confronted. For the briefest of moments, his entire frail body seemed to tense with fear? Apprehension? The warrior frowned again, picking up on the seer's odd demeanor. But before he could scrutinize it further, Abasi was speaking in a reedy, quavering tone. "Forgive me, sir. I merely stepped out beyond the village borders to commune with the spirit realm," he said, gesturing vaguely at the wastelands. "We mystics must isolate ourselves fully from worldly distractions to hear the ancestors' voices clearly." The excuse sounded feeble even to the seer's own ears. The enforcer fixed him with a stern look, clearly suspecting there was more afoot here than a simple mystic retreat. "Well, whatever ethereal meanderings consumed your morning, they'll have to be cut short," he said gruffly. "King Akinwande has summoned you to the palace immediately. He has need of your unique talents in plotting routes for a personal endeavor." Abasi felt his heart clench inside his withered chest. So the bombastic king had indeed taken his previous visions as a sanctioned call to unleash further savageries upon the missing prince and princess. Worse, from the enforcer's tone, it sounded as if Akinwande would be leading these unholy crusades himself. Struggling to keep his face an inscrutable mask, the seer simply bobbed his head in acknowledgement. "Oh, of course. I shall attend his royal presence at once and provide any insights the king requires." As the two turned and began heading towards the looming silhouette of Iwoland's central palace in the distance, Abasi couldn't help but steal a fearful glance over his shoulder. He knew all too well the true horrors awaiting anyone caught betraying Akinwande. Even an esteemed mystic wasn't immune to such profane designations. The question now became whether he could maintain his clandestine deceptions before the bloodthirsty monarch long enough to escape this escalating tempest of ancestral dark sides unscathed. For Abasi knew the truth about his recently unscheduled spirit walking all too well. And if King Olawale's reminders of retribution were to be believed, any leaks regarding his furtive trip to Oyoland could potentially unleash a tsunami of killing angers not even the strongest wards could withstand. The morning was still and serene in the peaceful village of Agada as Baba Oruko set about his daily routine. The elderly fisherman whistled a jaunty riverside tune to himself as he carefully inspected and prepared his nets outside his humble dwelling. However, the tranquil ambience was soon disrupted by the sounds of rapid footsteps approaching. Baba Oruko glanced up to see Alakija hurrying into the compound, the young man's expression clouded with obvious distress and trepidation. Alakija, the old fisherman, called out, immediately picking up on his friend's perturbed demeanor. "Is something amiss, my boy? You look as troubled as a doused ember this fine morning." The younger man swallowed hard, almost seeming to steel his resolve before meeting Baba Oruko's concerned gaze directly. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unmistakable weight and gravitas that gave the elder pause. "Baba, there is something you must know about Abidemi and myself. A truth we have kept shrouded since first arriving in Agada out of fear and self-preservation. The truth is, my eternal soulmate Abidemi and I are not simply common villagers seeking humble existences. We are the crown prince and princess of the warring kingdoms Iwoland and Oyoland, the heirs, whose forbidden love sparked unspeakable outrage and hatred." Baba Oruko felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle upwards as Alakija began unburdening revelations and ancestral legacies that turned the fisherman's world askew. With each new layer revealed, the old man's eyes widened and his craggy features contorted into maskings of shock and disbelief. The color visibly drained from Baba Oruko's face as the revelations washed over him in waves. His mouth worked silently for a moment before he managed to find his voice once more. "You and the princess," he sank heavily onto a wooden bench, hand trembling. "Ancestors preserve us the volatile royal bloodlines whose enmity has bathed these lands in turmoil for decades." The old man fixed Alakija with an intense, almost accusatory stare. "Do you have any inkling of the profane machinations and dark spirits you may have stirred by fleeing here? What unholy cycles could you have set into motion? How these two unassuming newcomers who had toiled so diligently alongside the village's humble peasantry were actually the heirs to the warring thrones of Iwoland and Oyoland. The profane details of what depravities their doomed, forbidden romance had triggered. And finally, the harrowing supernatural visions manifesting as visceral nightmares to Alakija omens, seemingly heralding an ancestral reckoning closing in like a bloodthirsty hurricane. As the deluge of revelations finally trailed off, Baba Oruko found himself struggling to process the cosmic magnitudes of what he'd just been entrusted with. Staring at Alakija, he saw the anguish and desperation writ across the younger man's features as the truth's full devastations came uncloaked for the first time. Finally, the old fisherman raised a wizened hand in a quieting gesture, his own expression a rictus of dismay and anger. "Peace," Alakija, Baba Oruko said, his usually jovial tones hardening into something approximating simmering disgust. "I have heard enough depraved proclamations for one morning, it seems." Alakija opened his mouth to protest, but the fisherman waved him silent again with an abrupt chop of his hand. "So let me purge any uncertainties immediately," Baba Oruko stated, fixing the younger man with a glare that could wither even the hardiest crops. "You and your paramour arrive in this sacred village under deliberately false pretenses, concealing your vile aristocratic bloodlines and dangerous reputations as murderous royal partisans." His nostrils flared slightly, seeming to catch some offensive scent only he could detect as the anger simmering behind his leathery features became more pronounced. "Not only that, but you apparently now brazenly confess to drawing these lands into your depraved, dynastic squabbles through whatever foul sorceries brought your demented night terrors into reality." Alakija opened and closed his mouth wordlessly as Baba Oruko leaned in closer, the old man's expression twisting into a sneer of revulsion. "So tell me plainly, you duplicitous aristocratic viper." The fisherman's next words came out as a low, disgusted growl laced with menacing undercurrents. "What manner of ancestral profanities and unholy reckonings have you foolishly unleashed upon the sanctity of Agada's fertile soils by betraying our village's pure trust?" Alakija didn't flinch from the old man's wrath, recognizing it as the unbridled fury of someone whose life's peaceful work had potentially been capsized in a single stroke. When Baba Oruko finally paused to draw a ragged breath, the former prince spoke in a measured tone. "I cannot argue your ire is misplaced, wise elder. But you must understand Abidemi and I never chose to reignite these bloodline vendettas woven over centuries. We only sought to exist together untainted by that hatred." His gaze turned a touch pleading, "which is why we require your counsel and protection now more than ever before. For if my father's hunters do in fact descend upon our newfound sanctuary—" Alakija's jaw clenched. Not even the fertile soils and azure streams of Agada will be enough to extinguish the profane infernos they bring.
Write the word "continue" in the comments section if you want the next part, and please subscribe to our channel.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Kindly click the subscribe button, like, comment, and share this video. Watch out for more intriguing and eye-catching videos from your favorite YouTube channel.